screen.
Okay. Thank you so much, Saskia. Thank you for this brief introduction. Like you said, I'm Minou Schillings, and I am a regenerative business facilitator, which means that I help business leaders to unlearn business as usual, imagine widely alternative futures, and realize regenerative transformations. And today I'll talk to you about regenerative leadership, regenerative businesses, and overall, it's an introduction, a flight over what it is. And like Saskia said, I will be first to admit that there is always much to uncover and learn, and this is a lifelong journey. So really see this as a boost in the world of regeneration. And if you want to learn more afterwards, I'll end the presentation with a bunch of sources so you can dive deep. On that note, I'll just start sharing my screen. Hello. Is this okay for everyone? Can I get some thumbs up there? Perfect. Yeah. So I'm going to start on a note that might be a bit surprising for everyone, but that is with this whole regenerative movement, exactly the amazing factor. It is something widely different and drastic than from what we are used. We as a species, we are very smart, intelligent species. There's a lot of wisdom, but also for very long periods of time, we seem to believe rather silly things. One of those things, for example, is that the earth was flat. We also used to believe that doctors didn't need to wash their hands before going to surgery. And even at some point, when trains were just around, we believed that women shouldn't ride them because they go too quick and their uteruses might fall out. So fast forward to 2050. How will we then look back at the year 2023 and what kind of widespread belief will seem to us silly at that time? I personally think and hope that it will be profit is the pure sole purpose of businesses at the absolute expense of everything else. And the best thing is, in John Elkington's word, is that the best way to predict the future is to just go out there and do it yourself. And that is what I'm here to talk to you about today. How can you as B Corp, how can we as the B Lab community, as the B community, help consumers and communities and businesses to further to realize this regenerative future, this regenerative transformation? And there are two questions that I would like to start with. First, what future would you imagine for your business knowing it will become reality? Let's take 30 seconds to consider this question. And the big question is, what future would you imagine for the world knowing it will become reality? Keep this question in mind, and let's hop over to Mentimeter. You can either use the code on this slide or use the chat, the link in the chat that will, I think Saskia or Carlos can share right now. Just go to the other screen. We need this one. And then the question is, are the imagined future of your business and the imagined future of the world aligned? I'm loving the amount of yeses here. That is absolutely amazing. I didn't expect much else, actually, of course, from a B community group. And this is indeed, in many ways, what regeneration is also about. It means embracing nature and life, and the well-being of all living systems, and the well-being of all humans as your core decision-making compass. And therefore, it is often way more aligned with the future that we would like to see for the world than purely what we used to want for traditional businesses. And let's move on to the next question, because I'm very curious if the future for your business and the future for your world, the imagined future, are aligned, then who or what is your business decision-making compass? Mental well-being, other, yeah, feel free to drop them in the chat, and I encourage anyway discussions in the chat, or if I'm saying something and you know a good book or resource or something that would add more depth to the conversation, to the discussion, please add them as well. I mean, after all, this is always a collective endeavor, a collective learning experience. Social well-being, customer desires. I'm not seeing any profit yet. That really excites me. Let's check the chat for a second. Social and environmental impact altogether. Perfect. This is a great start. I'll share my other screen again. So we're good again. Can I get a thumbs up? Perfect. Thank you, Dan. So like I said, it's often about the decision-making compass, and it can be really, really difficult in a noisy world where a lot of expectations and assumptions and beliefs frame us to business as usual thinking, frame us to really prioritizing profit before anything, or frame us to steer us to believe it is vital to run a business in a controlling and a mechanistic way, because otherwise you will not get to success. And today I'll talk about what the regenerative mindset is and how it is different from business as usual and traditional thinking. And a lot of this at the beginning might be familiar territory for you, but it's always good to go over it again, of course. So business as usual is really all about extracting. So you're destructing, you're degrading, and you're depleting. Now, sustainability simply just means the ability to sustain, the ability to hold up for a longer period of time. But over the last couple of hundreds of years even, we have hollowed out our society. We have hollowed out our social cohesion, our sense of community, depleted our resource depleted nature, destructed biodiversity, and all of that. So is that really something that we want to uphold for a longer period of time? Is that something that we would like to sustain? Or is it time that we regenerate, that we reimagine, restore, and renew? And this is what regeneration is all about. And within a business setting is what regenerative business models are all about. And you're actually very lucky, because last week, for the first time, we actually got a well-supported, researched, and quite clear definition of regenerative business models that I would love to share with you. So regenerative business models are organizations with regenerative business models focused on planetary health and social well-being. So someone who dropped it in the chat was right on the right track there. They create and deliver value at multiple stakeholder levels, including nature, society, customers, suppliers, partners, shareholders, investors, and employees, through activities promoting regenerative leadership, co-creative partnerships with nature, justice, and fairness, capturing value through multi-capital accounting. They aim for a net positive impact across all stakeholder levels. So you're noticing straight away here, it goes about different stakeholders, different ways of value creation, different systems that you're positively impacting. And there can often be a little bit of confusion between, okay, what is now the difference between sustainable businesses, regenerative businesses, circular businesses, and how do they differ? First and foremost, I would like to point out that none is like the right, correct way to go. None should be a standalone movements to a regenerative economy, to a fair and inclusive future, but they all overlap and they all have potential. Whereas sustainable businesses take a more socio-technical approach. So it's all about, for example, like carbon reduction, sustainable materials, but it can be quite technocratic, socio-technocratic. Circular business models therefore focus on closed loop economic systems, and regenerative business model, once again, bring them both together, where it's about enhancing the well-being of socio and ecological systems. And there are three key principles of regenerative businesses. They first and foremost recognize that human societies are deeply embedded into the biosphere. So we're not on top, there's none of this pyramid nonsense going on. We're in the middle, we're embedded in it. And that they depend on the health and the biosphere for their own health. So we're not just focusing on regeneration of natural and social environments for the sake and the health of the earth, but simply because it's the way forward for humanity. They have a value proposition of planetary health and societal well-being to nature and society at large. This means that they're not just decreasing their negative impact, but they at large have a positive impact. And they give more than they take and strive for net positive impact. And regenerative businesses have this amazing potential to help us realize and bring this emerging system of a regenerative future, of an inclusive and fair future for all living systems to life. So business as usual is a very clearly but very slowing, dying, dominant system, where regenerative businesses, especially of course B Corps, have this tremendous opportunity to help us move from the dying system to the emerging system. And by focusing on innovation, on imagination, on unlearning business as usual, on moving from a hierarchy to a sociocracy or a flatarchy, by instead of operating in a very mechanistic and controlling way, we actually help our employees to live up to their full potential. By doing all of these ways, all of these things in a different way, by constantly reimagining how we run businesses, what our definition of success is, what we want to achieve and how we collaborate, we can actually be these lightning beacons in the transition to a better future. But in order to that to happen, it's not just all about frameworks and things on paper and okay, how can we actually have a different business model? All of this is led by a new mindset. So I want to explore briefly the regenerative mindset with you. And keep in mind here that I'm working here with a, don't know why that is not loading, but I'm working here with a set of principles that have been widely researched and written about by scholars, for example, like John Elkerton, Lara Storm, Gals Hutchins, Carol Sanford, and all of that. But there is no like set clear of principles that define the regenerative mindset. Whoever you ask, it can be slightly different, and it can be slightly different in each context as well. But I'll just take you to a couple of them that I think are most important and are also capable of actually really changing the way that we show up in our businesses and lead businesses. One of the most important ones is that we should embrace a systems view. Right now, we're often seeing the world and running businesses in a disconnected way. So it's competition, and we zoom all the way in and we only focus on what is important for us. And we don't really take into account what that does for our community, the wider ecosystem, the other people around, the other businesses, and all of that. Whereas with a systems view, you enhance your own capability to zoom out, to see that everything is connected, that everything that we do, every decision that we make has a ripple effect. And therefore, that we should never see our business as an entity on its own, but always something that is part of a wider web. And the longer you look and the bigger it gets bigger and bigger and bigger and wider and wider and wider. So you can also in that way constantly expand your range of responsibility and the positive impact that you have on this wider view, on this wider system. Within a systems reality, within a systems world, everything is interconnected. So a regenerative business acknowledges this interdependence of systems and communities, industries, and also, very important of course, the planetary systems, and is constantly aware of its place within these systems and use this knowledge as a guide for strategic decision making, or like I said at the beginning, as a decision-making compass. And all of the interconnected systems, like Matryoshka dolls, they're also embedded. So it's a system within a system, within a system, within a system. And none of them stand alone. And therefore, you should never underestimate the potential of collaborations and the ripple effect. And I think we're already seeing that within the B community and with collaborations between different B Corps, that they can really, once they start collaborating, create a ripple effect and actually become more than just the two wholes apart once they combine them. That brings me to the next part, wholeness. So systems are made up of parts and nodes and wholes. And every living system, every living being can be seen as a whole within a system, a unique whole that the moment we start breaking down its connections, breaking down the interdependence between wholes, we also break down the whole in itself, and it actually doesn't have the opportunity anymore, the capability to fulfill its full potential. And I think this is what we are often feeling ourselves, but also I think we realize it with the work we're doing, especially when it's not purpose-driven, is that the society that we live in today seems to not respect this wholeness. It is breaking these connections. It's breaking the interconnectedness between entities. And therefore, it is stifling the feeling of resonance with each other, resonance with our businesses, resonance with the world around us. And this is one of the reasons that a lot of people feel unhinged, unbalanced. We're right now seeing a rise in mental health issues. 1 in 4 people will face them at one point in their life. And a lot of that can be traced back to not being able to feel whole anymore, and not being able to actually be in touch with our essence, because each living being has a unique essence. And when in regeneration, we talk about enabling ourselves, our employees, our communities, or living systems to achieve its full potential, we are actually talking about the full potential of their unique essence, because no living system, no living being, no human being, and no business is completely the same. We all have a unique essence that flourishes through interconnectedness, and when the wholeness is seen, accepted, and enhanced. One of the most vital elements of regeneration, I think, and also I think the easiest one to grasp, is that it should be life-affirming. Right now, a lot of the ways that we operate businesses, but also the way that we live ourselves, aren't actually life-affirming. We are doing a lot of things, going back to the beginning when I said people believe silly things. We also collectively do silly things. We're living in a way that makes us sick, but we're also running businesses in a way that we know does harm to ourselves, to future generations, and to our wider ecosystem. So life affirming means that all your decisions everything you do enhances the well-being of life overall. And next week, in our next webinar, we will be talking with Vivo, and they will for surely inspire you, because they have a lot of, they really embedded life-affirming and life-affirming decision-making into their business. They started out at the beginning, the Vivo is a footwear brand. They started out with the desire to regenerate the health of foot, like foot health. And they really take this further every time to regenerate so life and regenerate employee well-being, regenerate creativity, and really enhance life, grow life. Don't grow per se profit, but grow the capability and the flourishment of life. To be able to be life affirming, and this is not one of the classic regenerative principles, but this is one that I always throw in the mix because I think it's vital. Because without compassion, it is very hard to put yourself not only in other people's shoes, but really joining them in tackling the challenge. And the way we have been living means that we are in many ways nature illiterate, for example. There's a very big disconnect between us and nature. But we can also be numbed because of all the news and everything becomes a statistic. We can be numbed for all the sorrow in the world. So we actually have to consciously deepen our compassion and be aware of how we can show up compassionate towards ecosystems, towards ourselves, but also towards other businesses and the future generations. And once you really enhance your capability to be compassionate, to join someone, to join an ecosystem, to join a tree, or to join a generation that isn't born yet in their challenge, the rest of these principles that I just discussed will flow, because you will have the deep desire to solve and tackle that problem. And a great example on another B Corp is Greystone Bakery, because they set out to shrink or make the gap to the working market, to the job market smaller, by completely blindly hiring people into their bakeries and giving everyone the opportunity to show up, to work, to get to their essence, to become whole, to fulfill their potential. They are making these connections again. They are life affirming, because it can be hard to be without a job, and actually being with a job affirms your own life, affirms your well-being, and therefore also the role that you can play in showing up in a community, to your family, into the wider ecosystem. So one compassionate deed of making this gap to the job market smaller and helping, providing people with this opportunity can have this tremendous ripple effect, and it all starts with compassion. Another great example is, Change Please. I don't think they're a B Corp, but they should definitely be at some point. They're amazing. But this is a business where an NGO where they decided that they are giving people who are experiencing homelessness jobs and train them as baristas. Once again, a very simple idea, born from compassion, born from not just putting yourself in someone else's shoe, but joining them in tackling their challenge. And therefore they are creating ripple effects throughout communities. And overall enhancing the well-being. They are the well-being of humans. Regeneration in its core is always multi-generational. We tend to, in our current situation, we tend to focus on the here and now. I often ask people, imagine that you, when you think about the future, and imagine you have to make a strategy for the next important period, or for the period that your business can actually have impact on. I often get answers, I'll think about the next 5 years, the next 10 years, the next 15 years. But what happens if you turn it around, you're like, okay, I will focus on the time after my own death. That's also true compassionate, because it's in no way selfish anymore. You're really putting yourself in the shoes of the next generation. And therefore, it's completely selfless and enhances also multi-generational justice. And one business that does this beautifully is 7 Generations, another B Corps, and they really always look 7 generations into the future and 7 generations into the past. And there are a lot of examples of whole societies that managed to embrace a multi-generational way of thinking. There's a lot of course, in the indigenous ways of thinking and being, there's multi-generational is embedded in it and always taking care of the future and of the future generations. But also closer to the Benelux, the Church of Cologne, for example. And it took them 632 years to build the Church of Cologne. This is 25 generations. 25 generations of people that in sort of an estafette way focused on one goal, achieving one thing with multiple generations. And they were brought together by a higher entity. And then I would like to ask, what if we make Mother Earth or Gaia our higher entity, and sort of just for the next 632 years, work on rebuilding and renewing and bringing her back to flourishment. And the last, but one important element of regenerative thinking as well, the regenerative mindset, is cyclical and seasonal. We are the only species that thinks completely linear. This doesn't happen anywhere else in nature. It's actually a very unnatural thing to do. And we take it all the way home. Like, we're born, we make waste, and then even the moment we're dying, we go into a grave and we take more, or we burn and we take more fuel. And it's the same for a business. As a business is set up in a way to have an exponential growth and then either be sold for profit or diminish, but it's not set up in a cyclical and a natural way. Where if we would incorporate cyclical and seasonal thinking into our businesses, we would end up in a way more natural cycle. It would also be more respectful to the resource we use, to the knowledge we use, to the creativity, to our insights and our learnings, because we keep bringing it back into the next iteration. Or I always like to talk about the regenerative spiral, where every spiral of unlearning, imagining, and realizing, and every business insight spiral brings us closer to this regenerative future. But if we keep breaking these spirals because the business ends, or it's sold, or we expect it to always be summer, but it cannot be done, and then it collapses, this diminishes our opportunity to keep this flow of insights and resources going around in circles. And you can also see this in nature, of course. Plants and animals, they don't fight the winter. It's not happening. It's like they don't pretend that it's not happening and just carry on living the same lives that they lived in summer. They actually prepare, they adapt, and they perform. And then they perform extraordinary, sorry, that's a very tricky word, extraordinary acts of metamorphosis to get them completely through. What if we adapted this way of thinking in doing our businesses? What if we actively and consciously went through the seasons? This will mean we become more resilient, more prepared. We will have time to reflect. It will enhance our well-being. It gives us the opportunity to actually stay closer to our purpose because we have time to reflect on it and to see if we're still aligned. It means that we can be more in sync with the flow of resources or what people want, because why should we always be pushing for summer if you can work in a seasonal way? after talking about like the seasonal part, the compassionate part, the multi-generational part, for me and for many people in the regenerative space, this is really, really exciting stuff. It gives hope and inspiration, and it just does so much more than sustainability. And it's not only the more fun way to the future, it's not only the more balanced and more healing and more healthy way to the future for yourself, but it also really makes more sense for businesses to go and track the regenerative path. Because if you still, after all this, need the exact hard data, let's go explore it briefly. Right now, 125 trillion per year is the estimated amount of natural resources that we globally depend on. 96% of CEOs report talent scarcity as a top global challenge. 68% of the employees are not thriving at work. They're just not thriving. They're not fulfilling their full potential, not even close. 55% of global GDP is directly dependent on nature's services. That is a staggering number, besides the question of GDP is even relevant or not. 90% of the disasters are now classed as climate related. We have a 69 biodiversity created over the last 5 decades. 1 in 4 people, like I mentioned before, are affected by mental illnesses. 90% of all materials are either wasted, lost, or remain unavailable for resource reuse for years. While some industries depend more than others on nature, any industry can and should adopt regenerative thinking, because it will be your opportunity to be less dependent on resources, to actually fulfill and enhance the full potential of your well-being, to decrease your needs of natural resources, to enhance the well-being of natural resources and of nature, and therefore move to a more resilient situation, a more resilient future. Because virtually all organizations and humans, everyone, have close interactions with nature in the regional environment. And I cannot think, and I challenge you to think of one, but I cannot think of a single business that can flourish without nature or people. It just doesn't exist. So focusing on the well-being, of course, just makes all the sense. And it goes way beyond just focusing on sustainability and enhancing the well-being of your employees. It really is a completely different way of adopting and thinking and operating. And only then will we be able to navigate this increasingly uncertain times, because I've been saying this for 20 years, but the only thing you have to do to stay really like amazed and I wouldn't say inspired, but it's just staying alive and see what happens in the next 7 decades. We are standing at the front. It's just the beginning of a very uneasy, affected, and completely uncertain time. And the best way to deal with this is by really enabling both your environmental systems, the environmental systems you depend on, and also the people you work with, to fulfill their full potential, to be resilient, to be connected, to connect to their uniqueness, because this makes sure that you flourish. This makes sure that you will come back stronger. If you don't do this in the business as usual way, if you just, even as a B Corp, still prioritize profit over the expense of the environmental or your employees, even to a certain extent, you will at some point run into a wall. Because regeneration is the lens through which businesses can avoid risks whilst creating net positive ecological and social impact. and this is one of my favorite sentences, regeneration is a process by which people, institutions, and material evolve the capacity to fulfill their inherent potential in a world that is changing around them. In a world that is constantly changing, you need to be in touch and collaborating with and dependent on systems that fulfill their inherent potential. And I want to end within like one last minute, I know we're running short in time, with a couple of slides in imagination, because I think we're not only in a biodiversity crisis and a climate crisis, we are actually in a crisis of imagination. The inability to imagine a world in which things are different is evidence only of a poor imagination, not of the impossibility of change. Hoping on green growth because degrowth seems too impossible isn't the impossibility of change, it's just a lack of imagination. Hoping and that thinking that we can't provide proper living standards for everyone in the world isn't an impossibility. It is simply poor imagination. Obviously, we can do that. We just have to start asking different questions. We have to embrace what if thinking and act like we're this kid. That is, of course, a ridiculous idea. You'll drop down immediately, but just keep going, just keep asking the right questions, just keep wondering what if. And eventually, it is very, very possible, and we can achieve a lot that we set out to do. And what if we actually aimed for thriving? This is what a lot of regenerative businesses are asking themselves. And those are the businesses that support individuals and communities in the transition to a regenerative future. And like I said before, on the 31st, we will be joined by 2 inspiring B Corps leading this way. And if you want to learn from them, Saskia will tell you a bit more about that. You should join us on the next B Lab Regenerative Business webinar on May the 31st, because this might all sound still a little bit up in the air, and I get it all sounds good. We have to enhance our compassion and think of multiple generations, but then how, and how do I do that, and how does it look in real life, and what does it mean for my business model or my collaboration structure or my organization culture? It means a lot of different things in different ways for many businesses, and that's what we will be diving into in 2 weeks with Avallen and with Vivo. And I'm super excited for that, because they will have the opportunity to make it a little bit more tangible, and we will dive into the practical side of regeneration. Because being inspired is one thing, and it's a really good starting point, but then we actually have to go out there and do it and realize these regenerative transformations one bit at a time. So on that note, I want to ask you to all unlearn business as usual, imagine alternative futures, and then start realizing regenerative transformations. And I'm looking forward to meeting you again. And I'll give it over to Saskia.
Thank you so much, Minou. I think you inspired a lot of people who want to jump straight into action. If I look at the questions that we have in the chat, I'm conscious of time. We only have 2 minutes left. I'll pick one that came up a couple of times. And maybe we'll address it more in the second webinar, or we can elaborate in another space. But if you think of KPIs, how do we measure regeneration as a business, right? How would you measure regeneration for yourself to make sure that you're actually on track and doing, those things?
Yeah, there are a lot of different things, a lot of different ways to go about that, and different businesses are exploring how we can do this. One of them, for example, is Unity Effect. And what they're doing is they, instead of just working with like a certification or a metrics list or an analyzing way of analyzing how you're doing on a regenerative side, they are challenging businesses to sort of self-analyze in workshops. And because it's really hard to put in numbers, like you can put in numbers, regeneration of soil, of course, and of circularity, and in like improving air quality, but measuring the regeneration of the connections between your employees or creativity or employee well-being is a lot more difficult. So one of the challenges is already to not always want to put everything in metrics, but also test it and explore it in a qualitative data way, where you really start exploring within your organization, your wider ecosystem, like how regenerative you are and what you can still do. And there comes in the ecosystemic frameworks, which is really handy to map your own business network, your own ecosystem. You can do this both for yourself or for your business, and then see where the regenerative potential of your, where there is still regenerative potential, what needs regenerating, what is very degenerative, which interconnections within your organizations, which elements within your organizations are already connected in a regenerative way, and how can you enhance this, which are maybe parts that you need to let go, because letting go is also really vital. So I can actually, maybe afterwards we can, with the recording, send over a link to the ecosystemic map as well, because it's a great way in to start mapping out and seeing where you can start making changes. Yeah.
Super, thank you so much. And I'll finish on Vibeke, I'm sorry if I mispronounce your names, and statement in the chat. A good question to ask is, what would nature do as well? And I think for more practical tips on how to implement regeneration in your business, I'd love to invite you also to the next webinar. We can address a lot more of these questions there as well. And here are a bunch of assets, I believe, that are related resources that Minou is sharing here. So thank you all for attending. We'll share the recording by email, the link to the next webinar as well. We hope to see many of you there. I hope you feel inspired and maybe a little bit mentally rested as well. That it was a bit of a moment of peace for you too. And on that, I will close it here. So thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minou.